Morning. I'm Nick Conklin from AFFORGEN. I appreciate Chaplain Kitchens allowing me to come here and speak to you on a very important topic. I want to talk to you a little bit about big picture of where we're trying to go in the A3, and then get very specific of what we're trying to do in 24 and 25 and how that fits in. We've got some time for questions there after that. Okay. I want to answer all your questions, so we've got, like I said, time set aside for that. If you have questions that aren't answered here, please let me know, and we'll get back to Chaplain Kitchens and your staff and have you distribute those. Change is tough. Change is hard. When General Brown talks about accelerate, change, or lose, and the need for cultural change to prevail in the high-end fight, in the A3, we view that as our calling to provide a flexible, responsive, and ready force that will prevail throughout the spectrum of conflict. To do that, we need change. We need to change how we generate forces, building teams, regaining our readiness, how we organize, clearly delineating between line and staff duties in a form follows function approach, changing how we employ our airmen, combat credible, ace capable forces that can go out and execute the combatant commander's scheme of maneuver, changing our mindset. To prevail in the high-end fight, we have got to break out of our functional stovepipes. MCA is a mindset, and we need to see and for each airman to know that they are a force multiplier. And finally, changing how we empower our airmen. We've said decentralized execution for years, but actually expecting that from our airmen here. This change all starts with force generation. And a good force generation model should be able to provide four things. It should allow our leaders to articulate capacity. It should allow our leaders to articulate risk. It should regain our readiness. And it should provide predictability to our airmen. In the last 20 minutes, I have had 3 separate people come up to me and say, hey, sir, really excited to have you here. You're going to be great. Thanks for coming. I want you to know that they asked an AFFORGEN question to General Brown here. And so I want to take some time to address why Nick Conklin, I think that we need AFFORGEN, and AFFORGEN is a step in the right direction over what we previously had. If you go out on Google and you Google Manda Bay incident, there is a redacted, unclassified report out there. The Army did a 15-6 investigation. Subsequently, they called for another GEO investigation on top of that. And I'm going to allow you, if you allow me, I'm going to read from that here for you. Security Forces Preparation Findings. The initial investigation found that security force training and readiness were grossly deficient and significantly contributed to the attack. The security forces pre-deployment training did not include collective training or a mission rehearsal exercise to ensure that force was adequately prepared. In addition, the investigation found that security forces organization, preparation, training, and defensive plans were inadequate to counter the threat. The findings are reasonable and appropriate. The performance of security forces members in contact certainly provides sufficient anecdotal evidence to confirm the failure of their preparation for this overall deployment and this crucible moment. This was an attack of 20 to 30 Al-Shabaab fighters on a remote base in Kenya. Those findings are not dealing with the security forces members that were there. That is not an indictment of them. That is an indictment of us as an institution and how we organize, train, and equip. We did not put those members in a position to succeed. And that is why we need something better. The challenges that we are going to face in conflict against a high-end fight are going to be a lot different than the 20 to 30 al-Shabaab fighters there. And we have to start preparing for that right now. I believe that AFFORGEN is the way to do that. And so let me talk you through the cycle for that. In the reset phase, that's going to be an individual focus. So think our PME, PCAs will be during that, individual skill training, and personal readiness. As we move to the prepare phase, then it's going to be a team focus, looking at how do I operate with the people around me. We'll look at interoperability there, and a little bit of maybe AOR familiarization. As we move into the certify phase, it'll be an organizational focus, looking at how do these teams interact together. There should be a mission rehearsal exercise and a certification event prior to the available phase. In the available phase, it's an execution focus, looking at deployment, contingency response, or some sort of joint operation there. But what is the thing that we are trying to generate in AFFORGEN? Well, in 24, that's going to be an AEW in 25. But I don't think that is what the end result is ultimately going to be. I think the end result will ultimately look a lot like an AEW. It's going to have a C2 layer. It'll have a command team, an A staff, and a special staff. It's going to have a mission layer. So think 16 or 12 F-16s from Shaw Air Force Base, 6 C-17s from Charleston Air Force Base. And then it's going to have a sustainment layer of MCA trained and ACE-capable airmen, highly trained for the high-end fight there. This is what we are trying to get to in the A3. But there are two big challenges as we try and get there. The first challenge is that as an Air Force, we are optimized for garrison efficiency and not for warfighting effectiveness. And let's just talk through that for a second here. If you go to the MSGs at your base, any base really, they're going to have airmen that are in 2 or 3 categories. The first category of airmen are those required to perform the garrison functions at an acceptable, but not necessarily negligible level of risk, right? So there is a certain amount of defenders that are required to adequately defend Little Rock Air Force Base. We can't say exactly what that is. We have manpower studies that'll tell you you need this many, but then if you take one less than that, is Little Rock Air Force Base not defendable? If we deploy a certain number of those, if some of those are on the do not arm list, we don't know what that answer is. We have some bases that have a second level, which are those required to conduct an employed in place mission. And that may be at a negligible level of risk. So think, our defending our nuclear weapons, right? There's not a lot of risk that we want to take in that area. And then finally, once we get to those two, there's a third level that are left over. And those are airmen who are available for routine deployment taskings on there. This is how we are currently organized right now. And we don't have any idea of how many are in each category. When we tried to kick off XABs and AFFORGEN, we used what, in my opinion, are the two worst ways of figuring out how to get airmen to, how many airmen we have to deploy. The first was a small group in the Pentagon got together and came out with a plan and sent it out to the wings, and that was unexecutable. The second was we went and asked the wing commanders, what can you offer? What can you give to deploy? And it probably will shock very few people in here to know that there are no deployable airmen in the Air Force, right? Everyone has got all these reasons why they can't deploy their airmen, right? And they're all legitimate reasons, right? Like those wing commanders have a lot on their plate for that. The second challenge is that we have pursued two incompatible outcomes. So we are trying to implement a disciplined force generation model that deploys airmen as as mission-centric, task-oriented teams. Focus on a very specific mission and a specific task. But when we deploy them into functional organizations that largely resemble our garrison structure. And let me talk a little bit about that. So currently, when we're filling a ELRS, we'll take a couple of supply troops from DIAS, and we'll take some vehicle management folks from Shaw, and we'll take some log planners from Ellsworth, and we'll take an LRO from Scott Air Force Base. And they'll all show up at Ali Al Salim on 1 October, and we'll say, hey, here you go. You guys are great. Go make air power happen there, right? Those are completely incompatible on that. And so how do we get past that? Well, one way that we could get past that is to make more of a teaming approach for that. Instead of taking vertical cuts of some of the LRS, some of the different bases, we go to each base and look at how we can build teams of combat support airmen at those bases, right? Teams that you would go your first 6 months and take care of all of your personal readiness, your skill training, and then for that next year, you are working together as a team, learning each other's jobs, performing MCA, solely focused on the mission. And then for that last 6 months, you would deploy and go and execute with the same folks that you've been training with. When you deploy, you would go out and meet with other teams out there, and you would form a collective organization there. And this has a lot of benefits for what we're trying to get after, right? MCA, it really leads itself to the ACE concept, very adaptable on there. And it solves the capacity problem. There's a lot of benefits to this. And this is what Checkmate and some of the A3 OPTs, along with the FAMs, are trying to work right now of how to get to this. '24 and '25 are a good first step towards this as we figure this out. In '24, we are going to deploy force elements for the first time. And I want to talk through some of those with you right now. And so our force elements that we deploy, this AEW, is going to have a C2. So like I talked about, the command team, the A staff, the special staff. And then it's going to have a sustainment layer. So an EAB, establish the airbase, OAB, operate the airbase. And when those two are combined together, that's an XAB, a term that many of you have probably heard out there. When we add mission gen force elements to the XAB, then we get an AEW. I want to break down the XAB a little bit for you guys here. So there's an OPT that was stood up that is devoted completely to A staff. They have done tireless work here. trying to delineate and get the Air Force to a point where line organizations, line squadrons can focus on the mission and take all of the staff work and bring that up to the wing level on there. The goal is to make this manpower neutral, to keep from dual hatting. So the A1 will not be the FSS commander. The A1 will be the A1, and the FSS commander will be the A1, or be the FSS commander, and they are going to have different jobs. The job of a staff is to provide policy, oversight, resourcing, and guidance. The job of an FSS commander is not to provide policy, resourcing, oversight, and guidance. It is to do the mission on there. And we have lost that in the Air Force largely. So the XABs that go out in 24 are going to have standardized A-staffs. We are looking to how those can be incorporated into the larger Air Force. Many bases have already started that, and the Pentagon is working to incorporate that and have standardization throughout the Air Force. For the organization, the AEW commander will have some number of MGFEs. They'll have a chief of staff that oversees the A staff and the special staff. And then the support functions will fall under the Air Base Group commander. So with the exception of Al-Udeid in 24-1, this is what the deployed structure is going to look like. And then in 24-2, Al-Udeid will also look like this on here. Training and certification is a big part of AFFORGEN, and it's what is going to separate AFFORGEN from AEF. And it's what's going to help us to prevail in that high-end fight. It is definitely a crawl, walk, run on here. And so for 24-1, we are just looking at what we can do for that C2 force element. As we get beyond 24-1, we're going to look to have steps to complete that certification for the entire XAB on there. But training and certification has got to be a mindset as we look to deployments and ourselves as a warfighting force. And it's something that hasn't necessarily been there outside of mission gen force elements. Okay. Change is hard, right? Started off with that. Organizational change is really hard. If we are going to prevail in the high-end fight, we feel that we need to change. We need to change how we generate, how we organize, how we employ, change our mindset, and change how we empower our airmen. This is what we are looking to get after in the A3 here. We think that FY24 is a good first step. We've gotten AFCENT and the Joint Staff to accept XABs. We've got to focus on training. We've got an AFFORGEN model that gives us a roadmap to regain the readiness we need to prevail in the high-end fight there. I believe in AFFORGEN. I think it is the right way to go on this, and I'm excited to see where this goes in the future for the Air Force. That is my presentation. And so I want to give you plenty of time to ask questions, to answer your questions. Again, if we don't have time to get to your questions, I will be in the back for a little bit, and then please work with Chaplain Kitchens and his staff, and we'll get you the answers you need on this. So let me go ahead and...
We thank Lieutenant Colonel Conklin this morning. We're going to transition into a time of Q&A. I'd invite you, if you have any questions, to come to the 2 mics up front. I've heard that we have some creative people who can squeeze 3 or 4 questions into one setting, so we're going to ask you to limit your questions to 1 per person this morning. So please, if you have any questions, I invite you to come to the mics.
I think they're going to let me know from the back when my time's up. When I was listening to Chaplain Foreman's service, I thought he got a little long. I just kind of give him one of these, but I got a little bit more here.
We'll start over here, man.
Good morning. So as we become multiple capable airmen, what does that look like for a chaplain since we can't violate Geneva Convention? Is that more for the religious affairs airmen where they might be working as a maintainer or FM, or do we know, are we keeping our core capabilities like guarding this role as a chaplain?
That's a really good question up here. So can I get Chaplain Reynolds just up here for any chaplain-specific questions? I would like her up here. But I'm going to answer. I'm going to answer that. And so, MCA is a mindset, right? Like I said, we spend a lot of time, and our Air Force relies on training our airmen to do their primary duties on that. And so MCA is not at all anything that is meant to take away from primary duties, right? There are certain primary duties that we are not looking to MCA our way out of. We are not looking to take a chaplain and MCA them into air traffic control and clearing people to land, right? And so it is largely a mindset. As we get into what force presentation next looks like, and if this teaming concept proceeds, that is going to be a very specific level of MCA that has actual training events with people certified on it, okay? But in order to prevail, we have to have every airman with a mindset that they are more than just what this badge on their chest says on there, right? There are certain lines that we can't cross, right? And so chaplains have very clear lines that they can't cross there. Medical has very clear lines they can't cross there. But it is largely a mindset. And before we ask chaplains to do anything, we are working with the functionals to make sure that we are not crossing those lines there. So I don't see you working on aircraft as a maintainer anywhere in the AFFORGEN plan on that. Again, we are looking to work with the functionals on that before we go and say, like, yeah, you are doing this. We are looking to purposely have those religious affairs airmen doing these specific jobs here. It's a mindset, right? And we have not provided a lot of guidance from the headquarters on that. In a lot of ways, I think that's a good thing, right? Like, I don't think we should say, okay, religious affairs airmen can do this and can do that and can do that, right? Because it's a mindset thing. But that also provides opportunities for misaligned priorities, right? With a super zealous leadership team that's looking to bring people into jobs that aren't appropriate for that. If that's happened, please move that up your chain or let the FAMs know so that we can be aware of that.
As I'm short. My question is, I know at my base, and I think at most bases, if I'm going to ask questions about AFFORGEN and prepare my team, UDMs and really just a lot of other people are not sure. And if I go into the old AAF online tool for training and other tutorials, that's even very kind of still in the AEF kind of concept and not this. And so what is A3's plan on communicating more largely to the group what this is supposed to be? How are we training from the ground up, even starting from BMT? Because my team keeps asking, we're rolling it out in October, and I really, to be fully transparent, I don't have an answer for them.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So you are not the first person to bring up that concern, and I'm guessing that a lot of the people in this room have not had this detailed of a look into AFFORGEN previously. And If that's not the case, that's awesome. But we understand that we are behind the power curve on this in terms of getting that message out. There is an AFFORGEN website on the AFPC page that has information on there. We are working closely with PA to unveil this. There's an article last week that went out about AFFORGEN and what's going on with that. We are looking to get the information out there on that. The best way to get information out there is for our airmen to hear it directly from leadership. And so we are trying to give leaders at the wing level the tools, public affairs guidance that they need to be able to brief this, and asking them to brief that. And so I would say, let your leadership team at your wing know that this is what that they want to hear. And if they don't have the resources and information to provide that, let us know, and so we can set them up with that. Thank you.
I have a question. Do I need to go to the microphone? Can y'all hear me real quick? Just yell. What do we do with
Hey, Chaplain. Hey, we have a situation, and I think it's not just at our base. Has AFFORGEN and the structure of AFFORGEN taken into consideration presidential directives for national assets? You have the F-22, the F-35, the B-2, the B-21 coming online. We have an AFFORGEN cycle where we're going out the door, our delta's in April. However, we just went to Poland, all right, and we continue to do those missions. We also just had a suicide 2 days ago. And it keeps racking and stacking because our maintainers are just swamped. Because they're saying, yeah, we'll get ready as a team. And you go out there and there's rat training that's not lined up yet. You know, there's just CBTs like it used to be. Rat training's not ready. And they just waived it because commanders have that authority to waive it to get the mission done. So I hear that we're ready for the high-end fight, and this is a beautiful model for peer-to-peer, near-peer. But what do you do when you have still the mole popping that we have to do as an American Air Force? How does AFFORGEN set aside the reserve equipment personnel to get after MOOTWA, military operations other than war?
Yeah. Let me shake your hand. It's good seeing you again. Chaplain Forum is my neighbor in Guam there. And I told him, hey, if you ever have the opportunity to ask a tough question in front of a group, I hope you'll take that up. And so I'm glad you've seen it. Hey, excellent question, and I'm glad you asked that, sir. I think that AFFORGEN really shows itself best when we're talking about our fighters and our mission generation force elements. Before AFFORGEN, we had no way. So I talked about the 4 things that a good force generation model should be able to do. Articulate capacity and risk are the first of those. A year ago, we had no way to show the joint force what our capacity was on there. They would say, listen, you've got Air Force, you've got 58 fighter squadrons. What do you mean you can't provide one more? And our honest answer was, well, it's really tough if we do. We had no way to define what a readiness cycle looked like and how pulling someone that we didn't want to deploy in that phase would affect anything in the future. Right now, we can show the Joint Staff exactly which fighter squadrons are in the available phase, what are in the reset phase, what's in the prepare phase, and what's in the certify phase. Further, we can articulate, and that tells us our capacity, right? Further, we can articulate risk on there. So before, where we could only say, well, we can't pull one forward or out of phase because it sucks. Now, with a roadmap into the future, we can show that, okay, the triple nickel is currently in the certify phase. So if you pull that forward right now, next year, you are not going to have a fighter squadron here. Further, that triple nickel does not then become an available phase. You have now burned it for a year and a half instead of just, or I'm sorry, for 2.5 years instead of just 2 years on that. You said you understand how like this, I've said that this makes us ready. I don't think that we are ready right now. And part of the reason we need to change is because we're not ready. October 1st is when we're going to start deploying our BOSS forces under AFFORGEN and our routine deployments under that. But that doesn't mean that on October 1st that we are suddenly hanging the mission accomplished banner and we're all, readiness is there, right? This is a process. AFFORGEN is a roadmap that gets us to where we can regain that readiness on there. Change is tough, and you'll hear me say that a lot. But I believe that this roadmap and our leaders adhering to this, especially when it comes to our assets and mission gen force elements, which includes the maintainers and the combat support career fields that go with that, is the way to regain that readiness there.
Chaplain Newman.
Hey, thanks for being here. Great brief. We appreciate the burden you bear here with the hard work. So my question is in regard to the certify phase. Who's going to be, do we go to our FAMs, MAGCOM functional perhaps, to be the official certifier for HC folks in their bin when they're ready to go? Who's the certifier for HC?
So that's a really good question. For now, when we look at the certifying and the what it takes to get certified, we are not down to the career field level on that. We hope to be on there. But when we talk about certify, we are talking about in 24 that XAB. And is that XAB certified as an organization to go over? Part of that will include a look at the chaplains, right, and chaplain team, and are they ready to go there? The certification for that XAB will be performed by the NAF. It'll be verified by the MAGCOM and then validated by the A3. And there's a task order that's out there that kind of lays out that process there. But you bring up a point that I want to address, which is, how do we present forces right now? With fighters, we present in a squadron, right? It is really hard to articulate that for the Air Force. The Army presents forces as brigade combat teams. And there are 58 brigade combat teams in the Army. The Navy, carrier strike groups, right? There are 11 carrier strike groups in the Navy. The Marines have MEUs, and there are 7 standing MEUs in the Marines. The Air Force has AEWs. We can't articulate how many AEWs there are. And part of the reason for that is that we have gotten to where our UTCs are so small that we can't articulate our capacity or risk for those. When you have 1-2 person UTCs, it is really, really tough to say no, right? And even if you could say no, to get that 1-2 person team up to the levels where, at the 4-star joint levels where people are going to listen to that, they don't have time for those 1-2 person. So we are looking at how we can take our current UTC structure. We have 3,380 UTCs in MEFPAC, our UTA library. Our goal is to get that down to the low hundreds so that we can have UTCs, what the Joint Force looks at when they say, I want this Air Force capability, and get that up to larger levels so that we can say, No, because of an articulated capacity and an articulated risk on that. As we get up to those levels and our UTCs more adequately reflect actually how we deploy forces, then I think that certification becomes more obvious, right? Of a UTC that's not a one-person UTC, that's a lot to ask to certify that, right? But as you get to a functional team of individuals, well, that's a little easier to certify, right? And you can put more time into that. All right, I got the time up there, so I don't know. Do I have one more, or is this it?
We have time for one more.
All right.
Hey, sir, I'm Sergeant Torres. I'm at AFFORGEN right now, so I got an AFFORGEN question.
Yep.
Right now, just for the Chaplain Corps, our posturing is kind of rigid.
Yep.
You're going to get 5, UTCs.
Yep.
Even if an AEW doesn't need it.
Yep.
Do we have a plan to get more flexible to take a Lego piece off, take a Lego piece
Yep.
off?
Yep. That is.
What's the plan, sir?
No, I'm really glad you asked that. So let me give a detailed response to that. The XABs were created not with Nick and Tracy and 3 people in a room. It was created over the past 3 years with inputs from the FAMs, with inputs from the MAGCOMs, with lots of inputs on what do we need to present as a BOSS capability to the Joint Force. Before I got here, and so I can't speak to exactly how, but a certain number of chaplain teams were determined to be needed for that, right? In the GFM world, the Global Force Management world, the Army deploys a BCT as a capability. The Marines deploy a MU as a capability. The Navy deploys a carrier strike group as a capability. In 24, the Air Force deploys 808 airmen to PSAB as a collection of UTCs, not an XAB. A BCT commander is going to war with an understanding that that individual is responsible for accomplishing a specific and known mission set. When he has someone fall out, he gets to make a risk-based decision of, can I go without this person? Do I need to replace? And he can articulate that up his service chain of command. When we are deploying as a collection of UTCs, there is no GFM mechanism for that kind of decision. What that looks like is in 06 saying, listen, Secretary Austin, I appreciate what you're trying to do in ordering me these chaplains, but I think I know a little better than you on this, right? There's no way to do that. That requires a GFM action that is either coordinated through CENTCOM up to the Joint Force and gets an Air Force response, or on the other side, a Air Force action that goes up to the Joint Staff is coordinated through CENTCOM and back down on that. We are aware that XABs are not right-sized in every career field. Some we have excess capability, some we have not enough. We are waiting for an AFCENT response for 24 on where those excesses are on that. What's that?
We sent it up there, right?
Yep, yep. So we are waiting on that, and we are aware of that. We want to work with AFCENT as our partners to get this right on there. This is, I am not going to stand up here and tell you, like, listen, we have cracked the code. XABs are completely right. I don't know what you're talking about. It's heresy to say that we don't have it right, right? We have lessons to learn from this. Chaplains are one of those on there. And so we are working to get that right. I think we have a way ahead between us and AFCENT. There are things, though, that I'm concerned about. First sergeants are a area that has been identified that maybe we don't have enough of. And so if that is the case, how do you buffer that? And it may be chaplain teams as a means of helping with that. I don't know on there. And that is not a decision for me to make, but that is something that AFFORGEN is going to have to consider as they look at getting all of those inputs on there, and then we'll work with them for that. But great question. I very much appreciate you giving that information up through the chain of command and highlighting it today. Okay.
So we're so grateful for you this morning.
All
Thank
right,
you so much.
awesome.